even the lecture, like, I don't know about, we're both teachers, so
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure we were crawling a little bit because some of the
Oh,
lessons are just
yeah.
atrocious.
Welcome to Totally Pretentious, a podcast about great movies. I'm David.
And I'm Sean.
And on today's show, we'll discuss Ronald Neam's 1969 film, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, based on the novel by Muriel Spark, starring Maggie Smith, Robert Stevens, Pamela Franklin, and more.
Yay! This is David's movie. He made us watch this. Thanks a lot, David.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yes, funnily enough, my wife seemed to have the same reaction you did.
Well, I think what's really curious is I know what kind of books you write in the universe that they're set in, and so it starts to make sense why you are the way you are, because this movie clearly had a big impact on your outlook on the world.
I did not see this movie until I was working on my PhD.
Okay, yeah, but that was in 1930, so
Yeah, fair enough.
this is a weird movie, but it's not weird. It's just it's an experience, to say the least.
Yeah, perhaps not my usual path for this one, but it is certainly one I'm very fond of.
Ah, well, we'll get back to that, I suppose.
Okay,
in a minute.
I imagine we will. Yes.
Well, before we get started, friendly reminder that we want to hear from you. Share your comments with us about this and past episodes, obviously, especially Totally Pretentious, because that's what we're doing now. You can do that at skiffingfanny.com/listener suggestions. We are working on a mailbag. We got a couple of comments, so we're getting pretty close to that. So a few more would be fantastic. I also just want to note that not only has my cat decided to come up onto the table while I am recording, but also we got a brand new review that I am now going to read, even though I've mislabeled it in the script as being for David, because I forgot that I'm H2 and he's H1. And so we got a new review from someone by the name of Mal Foxley, or Mouth Oxley, perhaps, if they wanted to go for Alf's mom. It's very possible. So they said, great show. Hosts of the Skiffing Fanny Show podcast highlight all aspects of SF&F and more in this can't miss show. The hosts and expert guests offer insightful advice and information that is helpful to anyone that listens.
Oh, yay. How nice.
That's very sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks so much. I really appreciate that review. Thank you. It's 5 stars, by the way, just so you know. As always, if you want to give us a review, we'd love to hear from you, and we will read them out on the show. So go onto iTunes and leave us a review. You can also go to Podchaser. So yeah.
So the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, then, as I said, based on the novel by Muriel Spark, but with one further step before we got to the film, because J. Preston Allen first adapted the novel into a play. And it is his play which he has then reworked in the screenplay. So what we have here is essentially an inversion, a deconstruction, an annihilation, perhaps, of the inspirational teacher film. Tropes we are no doubt all familiar with, and that we seem to be getting in the opening moments of the film, and then keep coming back in very complex ways. The central figure, the title character, is played by Maggie Smith. Miss Brodie is the teacher at the Marcia Blaine School for Girls, and sees herself as a teacher with a mission. And what that mission turns out to be is to mold them in her image. And we find out very early on that she's a really big fan of such luminaries as Benito Mussolini and Generalissimo Francisco Franco. So we then follow through the years a group of girls, the Brodie's set as they are. We first encounter them when they are very young under her tutelage, and then we follow them through adolescence as they are no longer being taught by her, but still very much under her wing. And I think that's pretty much the basic setup.
Yeah, that gets the basic idea. I'm glad that you brought up that she loves certain fascistic leaders in particular. I believe the Wikipedia says romanticizes fascist leaders like Mussolini and Franco. And indeed, she is incredibly idealistic about what their missions are. This is set in the 1930s, we should note. So it makes sense why she's talking about them, because this is in the
Yeah.
context of the story happening in real time.
Yeah, by the time we get to the end of the film, we're in the middle of the Spanish Civil War.
Right, which leads to a character dying. One of the young girls who is sort of coaxed by Miss Brodie's idealism to join the fight, but we learn at the very end joins the fight against her brother. Her brother has joined the Republicans. She joins the Nationalists, and is unfortunately killed in a bombing and attack on a train instead of getting to join. And this becomes one of the big issues at the end of the movie. But I do find it really interesting that this is a film that is about a character romanticizing fascists in the context of a very fascistic school system.
Yeah, well, and I think this is part of the what I think getting to the core of what the film is doing with her. Well, I mean, there's a lot that is doing her, and you meant your use of the word romanticizing. I think is really important, because caught up in this too is the sexual nightmare that she is as well, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
she's trying to pimp one of her students into her former lover's bed. Let's not beat about the bush. Miss Brodie is a monster, but she is a monster existing in the context of that school, right,
Right.
where she is at odds with the powers that be, right, and so we have the usual dynamic of the inspirational teacher who's bucking against the system, against the prim, repressed, perpetually gray headmistress, right? We're familiar with that, and even scenes like when they're trying to get her to resign, and she goes into this impassioned speech about
Right.
dedicating her life to her students, and almost in tears as she delivers it. And we've seen those speeches before,
Right.
right? And in that moment, you believe her, right? Because, well, she obviously believes it herself, but then you remember everything else that she's doing. And so I think one of the things that the film does, which I think certainly is an aspect that makes it relevant today, is as we see the cult of personality around Miss Brodie, this is in microcosm. She is a fascist leader, right? We even see by the end, when she's talking about the Civil War, the dress that she's wearing is starting to look like a uniform as she stands there ramrod straight.
Mm-hmm.
The pull that these figures have, right? How these girls are fall under her wing. She is a charismatic figure, and we keep being shown all of the reasons why we should fear Miss Brodie, that she is a terrible person, but then we keep also being given these aspects where she's the side that she's fighting against doesn't have anything particular to recommend about it either, right?
Right.
So it's kind of I think one of the things it does is it shows the mechanism of seduction, of how people are brought into these malign belief systems, and the cost that it takes, that is exacted, I should say, from Pamela Franklin's character Sandy to finally break free of that.
Oh gosh, because I just don't think that she actually broke free. I think that she just became exactly who she didn't want to be. Uh,
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly in that last shot we see here's that, and we're hearing the voiceover of give me a girl at an impressionable age and she's mine forever, or words to that effect. That
yeah, at that moment they read as trauma, right?
Yeah,
Psychological trauma, which in the book I will note that Sandy becomes a psychologist or studies psychology and then becomes a nun.
yeah,
Yeah, at the end. In this, her end is she walks away from the school after graduation crying, essentially, while
yeah.
that monologue is taking place over her.
But she has seen, she does see what Miss Brodie is,
Yes,
and
she
I mean,
does.
she certainly has been shaped by her, right? We see the damage that has been done to her, and I think, I mean, on the side of some hope for Sandy is that she is very conscious of that damage, right? She as she says to Miss Brodie in the final confrontation, "You have harmed me." Right? You know, like there's all sorts of bad things that she's been warped into, and but she's the one who stops Miss Brodie, and we see that cost. But is she now a new Miss Brodie? I don't know if I go that far.
I don't know if she's a new Miss Brodie. I think that a lot of what this movie, what I struggle with in this film is what we have are two competing versions of fascism at work. We have the impassioned fascism, the one prone to speeches, which is the
Mm-hmm.
Miss Brodie set. Well, I should say the Miss Brodie, and then other variations of her. And then you have the sort of passive fascism, which is the school itself, right? Because what it is, I mean, if you look at the contrast in the film, there are a bunch of moments in which we see all of the kids singing, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
singing like a hymn or something, and everyone's in, they're sitting, they're prim and proper, they're meant to be singing. You are not meant to break this space. This is contrasted with Miss Brodie's impassioned speech about Franco and about how he stands for something and you must have ideals and things to stand for, right? In which all the girls are sitting before her, listening intently. Even some of the old Brodie girls come over to listen intently. This leads Mary to
Mm-hmm.
eventually join and get killed. Right. This is the moment when it's fair to say that Sandy is disillusioned to a degree. And so what actually I think probably is going on with Sandy is a really depressing reality, which is that once she graduates this school, she has been influenced and pulled in two completely different directions, neither of which are at all helpful for her in her future. Right? That she has actually been left worse off than if neither of those two entities
Mm-hmm.
had been involved in her life.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I agree completely that you were seeing the trauma there, and yeah, I would agree as well there that as far as escape is concerned, perhaps escape from Miss Brodie, yes, but a broader escape, I would agree, no,
Yeah.
because there is it is a very bleak situation that we aren't given another alternative.
Right.
It's simply a choice of evils, and that there doesn't seem to be any way out except well, to somehow deny them both, but we're certainly not given a positive alternative. So at the end we see the shattered Sandy leaving the school now, having metaphorically assassinated Miss Brodie. What her future is going to be, we don't know, because we don't see the world outside the school. We only hear about, we don't really see.
It doesn't technically exist for this
Yeah,
story. Yeah.
but and I think too the era in which it is taking place. I mean, it's worth remembering too. I mean, the somewhat caricatured figure that Miss Brodie is was certainly not an unknown one, right?
Mhm.
And the way in which extreme ideologies drew people from the arts to these figures, right? I mean, if just looking at the central figures of modernism, like Ezra Pound, who wound up writing
Being a
propaganda for
fascist.
Mussolini. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's again, it is very much a microcosm, right? The film essentially, other than a few brief glimpses, in a few brief scenes, the world does barely exist outside the walls of Marcia Blaine.
Yeah.
That is our world, and then inside that world, we see it replicating the dark currents of the macrocosm.
I mean, and this may be part of what makes this just a really difficult film, because on the one hand, you sympathize with the children because they're kids, like they don't really have a whole lot of control, right? They're in a context in which they are at the mercy of teachers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we see what teachers can be like at this school. It's not just Miss Brodie, right? We have what's his name, the sleazy Catholic with all the kids who
Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd, who in fact sleeps with a student,
Yeah,
has an affair with her, including painting her naked and all kinds of other things. Otherwise, let me rephrase. He paints he paints Miss Brodie's head on her body, I should say,
yeah.
because he is obsessed with Miss Brodie and is incapable of painting any figure without her face, including pictures of his own family and his own
And
children,
yeah,
which
heck, even the dog apparently.
even the dog looks like Miss Brodie. I think what you sympathize with the kids, but it is also that it is really difficult, I think, throughout this to sympathize in general with a lot of the characters because on the one hand you have Miss Brodie who is quite aggressive, right, and very passionate, right? She has
Mhm.
all these things and these ideals and morals, etc., that she wants to, imbue into her kids. And then on the other hand, you have ineffectual teachers who really don't stand for anything in the figure of Mr. I can never remember his
Mr.
dumb
Lowther?
Mr. Lowther. Yeah. His name was weird. Whatever. Mr. Lowther, who has like an estate outside of Edinburgh. And so he takes them there and he wants Miss everyone wants Miss Brodie. Like all the males
Yeah.
want Miss Brodie for reasons I still don't understand because she is such a troll. But like you have all these ineffectual figures, right? Gordon Lowther, who is the music teacher, who stands up basically for nothing. He just does what he's told. In one point,
Mhm.
his affair with Miss Brodie leads him to basically be told you need to resign from being a choir leader at his church, and he does instead of defending himself. Which, to be fair, he technically did the right thing. But Miss Brodie does make a good point, which is that like you basically don't stand for anything, right? You don't stand up for yourself. You don't do anything, right? People can just come to you with accusations, whether or not there's evidence for it, and you just bend over backwards. And then you have the figure of Miss Mackay, played by Celia Johnson, who is the headmaster, who also is really incapable of sort of challenging any of the systems in place. She just wants to maintain them
Mhm.
exactly as they are. She doesn't even necessarily want to think through what is happening. So there's this moment in the story in which she discovers two of the girls, it's Sandy and I can't remember which other one, maybe Jenny, who they write a like kind of, I guess for 1930s, scathingly seductive letter, imagining themselves writing as Mr. Lowther to Miss Brodie.
Yeah, it's Sandy and Monica, I think,
It's
who
Sandy and
write the
Monica.
letter.
Yeah, and so this letter, it's sort of scandalous, but it's also very obvious. It's not written by Miss Brodie. In fact,
Congratulations on your sexual intercourse.
right. It's written in such a strange way. It's clearly written by children. Instead of seeing this as a moment of saying like, "Oh boy, maybe we need to talk to these kids about appropriate behavior because they're kids," her response is, "No, Miss Brodie, you are a monstrous influence and you need to leave." And so there's like this sense that nobody wants to deal with any of what's really going on, even with the systems of power that they are in charge of. That there's just this like wallowing in misery and despair that I find in this film. But the kids are the ones that ultimately suffer from it all. Like they're just these poor kids. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Miss Brodie literally at one point is like, "I am grooming a child to have an affair with Mr. Lloyd."
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. I mean, the projection, right? And we see the damage it does, because and it's Sandy not Jenny, who winds up having the affair with him
Right.
for out of the jealousy. I mean, it's like just as she's absolutely right that Mr. Lloyd is obsessed with Miss Brodie, but so is she, right?
Yep.
Would she have had this affair with Lloyd if not for Miss Brodie, right? I mean, certainly
Probably
by
not.
the time we only see the affair as it ends, by which point Sandy is 17 going on 45 and is clearly the adult in the room, right?
Yep.
And is able to see things far more clearly and in a far more mature adult way than the pathetic Lloyd.
She has, as Miss Brodie would say, insight.
Yeah, she does, right? And that's the thing. The we keep having truly awful characters who are right in certain things, right? Like what you just said about Miss Mackay saying that Miss Brodie is a monstrous influence on the children. Well, she is, right?
She is, but she
Yeah.
doesn't know it.
No, that's the thing. I mean, Miss Mackay is in effect doing the right thing, trying to get Miss Brodie fired for the
Right.
wrong reasons. Miss Brodie is idealistically committed to doing the right thing for the students, except it's the completely wrong thing.
Yep.
And so, yeah, we're given a choice between the status quo, which is articulated explicitly by Miss Brodie as what Miss Mackay stands for, versus flamboyant fascism. Those are the only alternatives
Yep.
in this world.
And it's an ironic fascism because at one point Miss Brodie literally says, right, like I'm all about individualism, but what she's creating is not individualism. It's subsuming the self into a singular collective identity.
Yeah, and almost using them by proxy, right? Putting Jenny, who she sees as herself, right?
Yep.
The other one with red hair, putting Jenny into bed with Mr. Lloyd because though she clearly has feelings for Lloyd, she cannot reconcile sleeping with him with her own self-image. The projection of those beliefs that she has onto the fascistic leaders, right? She's constantly, throwing it out to other figures who are existing, her proxy figures in the world, as it were.
I mean, Miss Brodie is a monster.
But she gets great lines, right? I mean, that opening scene in the school where the two new students show up, and the first one starts going on about the
The
prizes that
badges
she
she's
has, the
earned.
badges in Girl Guides, and Miss Brodie shuts her down with, "For those who like that sort of thing, that is the sort of thing they like," which is an awful thing to say to a
It's
to a
really
small
cruel.
child. It's so cruel. It's also very funny. It's this awful thing, and then she lights up when Mary McGregor stands up and says that she has no interests, and of course, cha-ching, blank slate. So she's given these great lines when she takes Mrs. Mackay down a peg, or various other figures, right? The script is so beautiful and so full of these wonderful turns of phrase, but then you keep having to remember the context, right? That beautiful line about those who like that sort of things has come at the expense of this poor child who's just shut down and dismissed as irrelevant.
There is like a wickedly self-indulgent nature to Miss Brodie. Right? Even the lecture, like I don't know about, we're both teachers, so we
Yeah.
I'm sure we were crawling a little bit because some of the
Oh,
lessons are just
yeah.
atrocious. I mean, first off, I don't know what any child in her class is actually learning except things that Miss Brodie likes and cares about,
Yeah.
which aren't necessarily lessons. Because there are moments like there's a moment literally when she's like, "I'm going to show you more slides for my trip," like that she
Yeah.
took
To Italy, right?
to Italy and then to Egypt. She's like, "Yeah, look at my pictures," and then she's like, waxing lyrical about how she feels about them, and the moments she's giving kind of a speech, right? Then it's very emotional, but so much of what her lessons are really have nothing to do with the students. They're really about her expressing herself. I mean, she's sort of like the most extreme version of, like, everyone's had that like art teacher. They're there to teach art with quotation marks, but really they're there about their own self-aggrandizement. They want to feel important, right? And I'm not saying all art teachers are like this. There are a lot of fantastic art teachers that really aren't there about themselves, but Jean Brodie is like that kind of art teacher, and it is at times just insufferable because you want someone to tell her, stop talking about it. Like I actually want to learn about the damn tutors. Like, let's go. Like,
Yeah.
I'll
And we do see, I think it's interesting that the chemistry teacher, who's a very, very minor character,
Yep.
right? But we have a little arc in the background because, I mean, Gordon Lowther, who she winds up involved with him simply because she needs him as an alibi to avoid Mr. Lloyd for one weekend. So she starts the affair for that reason.
Yep.
Right. And Lowther is obviously head over heels for her. He wants to marry her. He's certainly wanting to do what what he
What you would
understands to be right.
expect. Yeah.
Yeah, but she keeps him at arm's length for, as we see, years. Right, this goes on for years and years and years until finally the chemistry teacher comes in, and she and Mr. Lowther get married. But we also get one scene of her classroom. And it's the one time we're seeing, oh, look, this looks like a good class, right?
Yeah.
See, we're creating hydrogen, but be careful because, we could level the place. But she's interesting. The class is lively. She's doing her job. she's not creepy like Mr. Lloyd. We see okay, yeah, there, right there is a good teacher
Yeah.
in what little we see there, and Miss Brodie is not.
Miss Brodie's not. I want to know. I say good chemistry teacher because my history with chemistry teachers is basically a falling asleep. Because the thing I wanted to do in chemistry was like, I want to light stuff on fire. Like, let's go. And what does this chemistry teacher do? She's like, hey, look, we're doing all this boiling and making all this stuff, but we're making hydrogen. Now, watch, kids. I'm going to light the hydrogen on fire. Which is really cool and exciting and exhilarating because, like, you get that sound, the poof, as the tiny bit of hydrogen goes up, and the kids are totally into it. The kids are into Brodie as well, but what Brodie is, what the chemistry teacher does is, I'm giving you knowledge, right?
Mhm.
Here's the knowledge, and then here's the excitement that comes from the knowledge, right? Information on how you get hydrogen. What does hydrogen do? Well, we're going to look, poof, exciting. What Brodie's doing is like, all the world is excitement. Here are my ideals that I'm going to shove into your brain, and you need to become this thing that I have desired for you, regardless of whether or not it is the thing you want to be, right? Poor Jenny, if I recall, Jenny is the one that she's grooming to have sex, right? Yeah. So Jenny, right, she's grooming this girl, kind of not. She doesn't even know that that's what she's being groomed for, right? But Sandy discovers it, and what Sandy does is takes on that mantle. She becomes that.
Mhm.
Does it do anything of benefit for Sandy?
No.
No. The knowledge that she
No.
discovers from that is actually disastrous, right? And we can assume that that knowledge would probably be equally or at least differently disastrous for Jenny, who again is a fucking child. Right? These
Mhm.
are these children start what, maybe 12, 13 years old when we meet them. Are they meant to be younger? It's hard to tell. In the book they start at 10, I believe.
Yeah, no more than 12, I would say. I mean, they're 17 by the time we get to the end of the film.
Right. Yeah. And so you have these children being groomed into roles that have been determined for them. They're not being given knowledge to then discover themselves. They're being told, or at least the Brodie set are specifically are being told who you should be. And
Mhm.
even more so with the Brodie set given like literal roles, right? Jenny is to be a home wrecker, basically. She's supposed to go in and sleep with the
She's
teacher
supposed to
and
be the
become her
great lover.
surrogate. She's supposed to be a great lover. Sandy is going to be a spy for the
Yeah,
Secret Service. And then there's Mary, who is basically gets coaxed into becoming a revolutionary and dies.
and Monica's supposed to be an actress. Yeah.
But she does in the book. She goes on to become an actress, or at least leave school to become an
Hmm.
actress. In the book, I believe Jenny marries a man and marries a handsome gentleman. I think so. But yeah, but the point is, like, all these people are being groomed to be a thing, and
Yeah.
some of those things aren't inherently bad. Like being an actress is kind of cool, right? Being a Secret Service member is it's kind of cool, right? Those are neat.
And so it's a bit of a relief then that both Monica and Jenny seem ultimately to be oblivious of what, especially Jenny, of what Miss Brodie is trying to do. Right? They manage to remain children, whereas Mary is killed and Sandy grows up way too fast.
Yeah, I mean that's the sad reality. I mean, Sandy is the great tragic figure, because I mean, the irony is that, as Gene Brodie says, right, you have great insight, right? You are my confidant. I can lay all this extra on you because you can see the big picture. She starts out as a child, and
Yeah.
so when she gets the big picture, right, she's dealing with all the childish feelings that come with that, right? She's not an adult that can fully make sense of what this big picture really means. So there's jealousy involved, and Sandy is being told, like, you're going to go into this role that maybe Sandy doesn't actually want to go in, because Jean Brodie doesn't know shit about Sandy. Not really. She doesn't know who Sandy actually is. She doesn't know who any of these children really are. She's trying to, like, I mean, Mary's the great one, as you said before, right? She's the blank slate. She's the one that is empty and I can put all my stuff into, which she does, and ultimately leads to her death, which is why at the end, in that big speech that Sandy gives, right, she basically says, you were a murderer. You killed her.
Yeah, and we see there with, I mean, on the one hand, another uh, terrible cost, because the thing that Miss Brodie says that is her job to do is to put old heads on young shoulders, right?
Yep.
And that's certainly what Sandy has become by the end, right?
Yeah.
But she is also, but her insight is fully developed, in spite of Miss Brodie, right? When Miss Brodie says you have great insight, she doesn't. She's using it just in on her terms, right? She doesn't for a moment believe that Sandy will turn that insight on her, but Sandy does, right? So when we see Miss Brodie in full fascist flight, extolling Franco and telling the girls to lead, right? And they're all going, "Yes, Miss Brodie," and Sandy saying, "No, Miss Brodie." There, I mean, the disillusion has been growing, but finally at that point we see her seeing Miss Brodie for just how dangerous she is, and that she must be stopped. Which the decision finally coming in the second last scene they have together in the classroom after the death of Mary.
I do think it's interesting that the movie. I'm glad you brought this up because the movie gives us the answer: who is the betrayer, right? Because Miss Brody is wondering, like, who's betrayed me because of the thing that Mackay says, which is that, "Are you sure, basically, that all of your girls are loyal?" Right? Because clearly one of them has not, and we obviously learn it's Sandy. And so in the movie that gives it away in that moment, that eventually she realizes who is the betrayer, which again is Sandy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like Sandy's not really hiding it. Sandy's like, no,
No.
no, no, we're going to have a talk right now. In the book, she only discovers or realizes on her deathbed,
Mm-hmm.
after all is said and done. And I think it's an interesting change because I think for the film, it works quite remarkably well to have Sandy stand up for herself, to really tell Jean Brodie what she really thinks and not just sit there and be a vessel for Brodie's, you know, ideals. That I think it makes this particularly powerful conclusion to a really disturbing teacher relationship with children. It is skin crawling the way that education works and the damage that it is doing. And I think a lot of what you brought up throughout this a number of times is that a lot of what we're seeing here is the dangerous cost of education that is done for the wrong reasons because of Brodie's sense of it. I mean, like we could say that probably Lowther's fine because all he's doing is teaching him how to sing, right? He's not doing anything particularly bad.
He's too weak to actually do anything.
Right. Yeah, he's too
Yeah.
weak. He's really just there of like, we're here to sing. We see a moment when he
Yeah.
is teaching a singing class, and it does seem that, again, he is fairly innocuous. Like, yes, he doesn't stand up for himself, but also, like, he's teaching how to sing. He's not teaching them morals and values,
No.
right? Teddy Lloyd is actually kind of a little bit weird with his teaching, but it's still not like Brodie, right? He is talking about like the curvature. He's a little bit overly obsessed with the curvature of the female form, but it elicits giggles, right? Because he's like, oh, like here's the breast, and all the little girls go because they're children, and so
Yeah.
breast and buttocks are funny. But Miss Brodie is not. She is dangerous
Mm-hmm.
because what she is doing is woefully, horrifically unethical. You know, I feel like as a teacher watching this, I'm not pretending I have a whole lot of influence over college students because they're adults at this point, and so if they're messed up, they're already messed up by the time they get to me. But I just feel like from an ethics perspective, I could never be a Brody, even if what I actually believe is good, which I think mostly I am. I believe in good things. I'm not a fascist, those kinds of things. But I could never sit there and do the Brody method of education and like let me make you into a version of me or a version of you that I think you should be.
No, one hopes not. And I think too the thing with Miss Brodie and what makes her so insidious is that, I mean, her students are gripped by every word she says. Right? They worship her, and she does. And when she gives that impassioned speech to Miss Mackay, right, we see how deeply she believes in her mission. Right?
Mm-hmm.
She believes that she believes the right things. Right? That she is doing the right thing. And we see how monstrous that is, and that's why I said that the film works as a deconstruction of the inspirational teacher movie, right? I mean, how many of these stories, whether in novels or in films or in television, everything from Goodbye Mr. Chips to Serve Them All My Days to Dead Poet Society, and on and on and on. Right, the one teacher who stands out, very and very often, particularly, let's say, Dead Poet Society, right? The flamboyant teacher in the conservative environment, right? Who breaks all the rules and gets the adulation of the students to the point of cult of personality, right? I mean, it's as if Prime of Miss Jean Brodie were tearing down Dead Poet Society a couple of decades early. And so if we think of how many of these kinds of narratives position the teacher as some kind of savior, and sometimes explicitly the white savior, if we
Mm-hmm.
think of some of the other variations. So here we have a film where the teacher has a very messianic complex, but the tropes are there from all of these inspirational teacher movies. We recognize them all. We even for moments would fall into them. Right? It's like, yeah, Miss Brodie, you tell Miss Mackay, or when we see just how she stands out against the drab, gray, suffocating status quo, and then in the next second go, oh no, holy crap, no,
Yeah.
you're evil, right? That this kind of cult of personality is dangerous. This sort of teacher, even if we didn't have the worship of Mussolini and Franco, she'd still be a terrible, terrible presence in those children's lives.
Yeah, I mean, there's this. I mean, one of the very first moments in the movie is literally the moment at which she is saying like we're going against the status quo, right? Has them define what it means and all of these
Yeah.
kinds of things. And well, I will admit I was not on board Team Brodie at the beginning, primarily because I just found her insufferable the way that she taught. But I think that there's what's going on is still I could see how that would have an effect because she's saying like here is this system and it's like super dull and boring and like it's lacking the passions. It's just like, there's the facts, ma'am, but I'm going to give you this other way of viewing the world and it's going to be full of wonder and emotion
Mm-hmm.
and ideals and all of these things. And that's the thing that we're going to push against the status quo because you should be great individuals into the future. Obviously, it's not what she's actually giving them. And there are moments, I think you're right, in which the story, like you feel yourself being sucked in. You know the words are wrong,
Yeah.
but the way that it's being framed sucks you in. So the very first impassioned speech, I think, is one where even though you know what Miss Brodie thinks, she's already said stuff about fascists where you're like, she said some Mussolini love stuff, and you're like, okay, you believe some really bad stuff. But when she gives that speech, you're going like, yeah, you tell Miss McKay because you don't like Miss McKay either. And you're like, yeah, go get her. And then you realize, no, Miss McKay's technically right. She's just wrong about how she got to be right. Damn it.
Yeah, she's no good either.
She's no good. They're all wrong. Because on the one hand, it's wanting us to like, yeah, push against the status quo because I mean, this is 1969, well, 68, 69, depending when they made it, right? So there's this sense of like, yeah, this story is pushing against what is clearly still a problem in British society of the way that school systems are kind of repressive.
This is, I mean, 68, 69. This is, I mean, we've had May 68 in Paris. We've had, like it's an era of uproar, right? In the
Right.
States, in Europe. So the film may be set in 1932, but it's very much speaking to 1969.
Right. That's kind of what I'm getting at is like it is speaking to an era of like, here is the way that the school system like is just repressive. So when you hear push against the status quo, we gotta go against it, gotta go. It's like, yeah, you're right, because this school sucks, right? It is churning out robots.
Yeah.
Like women who I mean, and specifically it's gendered, so it's women who are being turned into these like prim and proper concepts of what
The
women should be.
virtuous woman whose price is above rubies, right? That's the school's motto.
But yet, the more you dig into this, the way that Miss Brodie speaks, the way that she's doing everything, I think you're completely right that you cannot watch this and say this is how, even if everything she said was right, this is how education should work.
No.
Because the reality of what is being done to these children in this movie. And I want to note that in a lot of ways it's very subtle. So we're talking about it very overtly, right? It's not like the movie is saying, yeah, like here's all the things, a lot of it is kind of snuck in very cleverly. But the way that this system, the way that Miss Brodie and the way that the system are both affecting these kids is trying to like extricate what makes them unique individuals and replace it with something else. The school replacing it with, the virtuous woman, and Miss Brodie replacing it with whatever she seems to want depending on which student she happens to be manipulating at that moment.
Yeah,
But it is, the idealistic emotional one who, goes after their passions. But as long as they're passions that Miss Brodie thinks are appropriate passions,
yeah, or hers.
or hers, or specifically hers, Jenny, as the surrogate, right? Literally, that's
Yeah,
what she wants Jenny to be. It's a surrogate to get Lloyd off her back. And to be fair, Lloyd is he's a bit sexual assaulty. I mean, he literally, I didn't realize they were having a thing in the beginning of the movie when he traps her in the bathroom.
right. Oh yeah, no, I mean, he's no prize. Yeah. Interesting side note: Robert Stevens and Maggie Smith were married at this point when they were making the film. But yeah, I mean, he's he's a terrible, terrible man, right?
Yeah.
And yet when he also winds up being, he gets to have some dialogue of sort of moral high ground speech, right? To where you go, I cannot follow. Right, as if he's too finally cutting himself free of the obsession of Miss Brodie, right? But it's like she's grooming, one monster grooming a child to be put into the bed of another monster.
And Lloyd technically grooming a child as well. There's a lot
Yeah,
of child grooming, both in its just mental sense, but also in its sexual sense. And sex
yeah,
in this movie is like, whew, it is a whole ordeal because I mean we've mentioned all of the varying ways, but Miss Brodie uses sex to her advantage, right? She has sex with Mr. Lowther on a number of occasions, but she's using Mr. Lowther, right? She has no intention of marrying him. She technically has affections for Mr. Lloyd, but Mr. Lloyd is trying to use children for sex. I mean, he uses Sandy in horrific ways. I mean, I guess technically she might be like of age at that point, but it's a child being
it's still,
groomed.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the only glimpse we have of presumably healthy sexuality is the relationship between Mr. Lowther and Miss Lockhart, but that's essentially off camera, right? We just know that it happens.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Lowther is probably the only teacher who is technically a good, well, and the woman he marries, right? But Mr. Lowther's at least on screen quite a bunch. He's largely a good person, a weak man, but a good person. He is with Miss Brodie for what to him are the right reasons. He doesn't want to sneak around. He wants to marry her.
Yeah, I mean, he has
You
no
know?
idea that he's being that that their what 5 6 year affair is simply a way of keeping Teddy Lloyd at bay,
Yeah.
right? Miss Brodie has no feelings for him other than that he does whatever she says. That he essentially is as pliable as any of her students. He essentially becomes a 6 foot member of the Brodie set.
I mean, he does, and he's a sweet man. Everything is for Miss Brodie in particular a tool, to use to get ultimately what she wants. And the really disturbing thing is at the end of this, I don't think she actually learned anything,
No,
because she screams assassin,
yeah.
assassin at Sandy, again, as you say, metaphorically assassinated by one of her former students. But it doesn't seem like she stopped to think maybe something I did was wrong.
No, it's always someone else's fault, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why the film's relevance continues to this day, right? It's important that we understand that we see the ways in which Miss Brodie is seductive, also, right, in the broadest sense to everyone around her, and that we feel that tug as well. That we also see that she believes whatever is coming out of her mouth at the moment that she utters it, and so we see how people are sucked into fascistic movements, surrounding these figures who believe whatever they're saying, even
Yeah.
if it contradicts what they said 2 seconds earlier. None of this has gone away.
Yeah. Whew, boy. We just had like a moment, David. We like went on a bit of a rant together on this movie. There's so much. I mean, look, I didn't hate the movie. I want to be clear. I really enjoyed the movie, but I did find so many people in this loathsome.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
obviously intentional, right? Miss Brodie's not meant to be the actual hero of this story, right?
No.
Poor Mary, right? This poor young woman with a stutter, she gets coaxed into doing this thing she doesn't even understand, and is
Yeah.
and is held up as a hero. She's a heroine. She went off and she did what she thought was right, and she died, and if only she'd lived longer she could have reached her full potential. And it's like, you coaxed her into going.
And there's the possibility that Sandy raises that after all, Mary wouldn't have been able to know how to get there on her own. So the way what she speculates to Mr. Lloyd that yeah, here's the envelope marked francs, the envelope marked pounds. Here's how you get to the train you get to here. Here's how you get to Perpignan. Here's the train you need to get to Spain. Right, that very likely Brodie would have given Mary very explicit instructions and the money to get to Spain.
Yeah, she is a monster. I mean, Sandy, I think, is right to say that she also is entirely responsible. Mary's death is on her. It's blood on her hands,
Mm-hmm. It
you
is.
know. And to the irony of calling Sandy an assassin as Sandy walks away in the shadows of the hall is really played out here to great effect, because those are the
Mm-hmm.
last words that the character directly says to anybody is assassin. But it's not an assassinate. I mean, the thing is that Miss Brodie gets to keep her life. She gets paid through the rest of the term, which is very generous, and she is alive. She can
Mm-hmm.
go on. She can move. She can go to start at another school. She has the potential to continue to go. Mary never had that. Mary went to a war where the likelihood of her death was already high, right? Because that's what happens in wars. You get freaking shot. And she died instantly before she even got to go there. Her potential was completely destroyed. Right. The irony is that Miss Brodie keeps talking about her prime. I'm in the prime. I'm in the prime. And at no point is she actually in her prime, except as a person of great manipulations and distortions.
Yeah. No.
She's a
Agreed.
sociopath.
Yeah, of a particular kind, right? I mean, her passionate belief in what she's doing, I think, is part of that danger, right? That she's not just with any sort of lack of emotion, sort of setting out to on a mission of self-aggrandizement. She honestly believes that she is devoted to her students
Yeah.
and is shaping them in a great way, right? And that's part of the horror of her.
Yeah. Another irony. She says that Sandy has insight, but of the people who lacks insight
Yeah,
is Miss Brodie.
yeah,
She
absolutely.
cannot see herself. She's incapable. Yeah. And again, that's part of what makes her also dangerous, is she cannot tell when she is doing the wrong thing.
Completely.
In a lot of ways, this movie's kind of a horror movie. It's just more psychological than it is. It's more like apt pupil than than
So there
anything.
you
Yeah.
go. It's a perfectly fitting film for me to have suggested.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just I was expecting a lot more weirdness, but you gave me something a little bit more normal, David. So that's all good.
Yeah,
Well, I think we've hit it. So shall
I
we
think we
move to the
have.
next point?
Yeah, so so that's it. But before we go, Sean, what film are we watching next?
Well, I'm gonna get weird next time, because we're going to Thailand
Uh huh.
for a film called Uncle Boonmi Who Can Recall His Past Lives from 2010,
Okay.
which was written, produced, and directed by Apichat Pong Weerasetakul. I believe I've got that okay, but I'll keep working on that for the next episode we do. Yeah, it's a very unusual film. I saw it in grad school. It is, I would argue, kind of a fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
but it is quite strange.
Well, it's one that I've heard the name, but one that I haven't seen. So I'm really looking forward to catching it for next time.
I look forward to talking with you about it very much, David. So this would be great.
Yay! So if you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, head on over to skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. Also, follow us at Skiffy and Fanty on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. Finally, if you like what we do, please support us at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty and give us some love by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. You can find me on Twitter at David_Annandale or at my website, davidannandale.com.
And you can find me at Sean Duke on Twitter, seanduke.net, and patreon.com/thejoyfactory.
And that's all we wrote. Makes it awkward.
Well, that's usually my job, David, is to make it
Hey,
awkward.
that was my line. You wrote it as my line. So now it's really awkward.
It's technically not your line. It says H2. you, you don't even know how to read it.
Oh, it does too. Yeah. All right. Do you want to? We should back that up.
Oh, okay. Well, it's too late now, David. Because
Sorry about that.
the thing that you don't know is that for years I've been trying to get you to make it awkward, but I didn't want you to know that what I was doing. So since our friendship began, I have been slowly manipulating you with my ideals to get you to make it awkward.
Well, there. Well done. Mission accomplished.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.